the sound of it tonight. I think Alice is going to be glad. We've been having some technical issues tonight, so you can hear and see everything, which is good. The part we're really not sure of is whether they will record, so if they go back to it, or so somebody could make the webinar tonight if they wanted to view it. We're not sure if it will be successful in uploading, or not, but we'll keep in touch with you and let you know. I'll post whatever happens after we find out. We'll go from there. So we'll get into it tonight. This is week 8. We've only got 9, 10, and 11 left, so we're getting down to it. The agenda is, I think, pretty much everybody has been on one of these before. So the agenda is going to be the same, with announcements and updates, a review of the course notes, and I've got a few things to talk about with that. Updates on group work. We'll have the campaign will continue to evolve from what I posted on Monday, and there will be a new posting on next Monday with some new developments that I'd like you to think about and comment on. And then any questions you may have about, again, the reading or the course notes or anything else course related. And then good and welfare, I'll have some closing announcements, and if you have anything, if we have some time at the end, I'll cover that too. Pardon me. Excuse me. And again, hit the question function. If you have a question for me, I'll see it and I'll read it to the group when we hit the question and answer period. But you don't have to wait until then to excuse me again, to type out your question. Okay, so just some definitions on the course notes. The course notes were a series of chronologies of different kind of organizing campaigns. They range from the traditional NLRB or public employee election campaign. There was a couple of different slides on non-collective bargaining campaigns, and I'll talk about those and where they come into play. One was just a brief timeline about that. It talks about one way of approaching it. Another one was more detailed about the non-collective bargaining jurisdiction milestones and benchmarks. Another one dealt with contract mobilization, so getting ready to bargain a contract or during a contract campaign. And then an issues-based campaign. If there's something specific that is a concern to the workforce or the union that deals with an issue or issues, then there's an approach with milestones and benchmarks. And then there's one for a sample electoral or political campaign. And because we get involved in those, and from my perspective, that's a type of organizing. And also, it gives you the ability to cross-reference what's happening with political campaigns and people that may be involved with the unions that are involved in your union and also involved in political campaigns that you may not have thought about getting involved in organizing. Talk about that too. So the first 3 definitions I have are the main terms that are used for the added reading that I had for this week. The first is a milestone, and it's basically an important part, an event within a campaign, and it can mark a turning point. And the way I have it laid out is those turning points are positive and progressive. That is, that they build on each other to an outcome that you're looking for. However, they can also mark downturns in a campaign. So just be aware that there may be milestones that are problems in a campaign as well. Like instead of filing or placing a demand for recognition, it could be a milestone, could be withdrawing a petition and figuring out sort of how to pick up the pieces after that. So they could be either way. Benchmarks are a standard by which something is measured or judged. So how do you know when it's time to reach the next milestone, or you should be reaching the next milestone? Well, the samples that I've given here in these chronologies give examples of the kind of benchmarks that you can expect in general while you're progressing through a particular milestone. And then activities are specified pursuit or pursuits in which a person, hopefully a member, partakes in. So activities could be, just looking up on the handouts here, things like developing a theme and a message, developing written material, a daily debrief of staff and worksite reps and volunteers, develop tests and things you want to ask somebody to perform for you for a test, and assessing values of how strong members are that have been approached or how weak they may be in support of the union, as examples. So as you look through those PDF files that were attached to, which essentially were the course notes for this week, read them in terms of, activities build on benchmarks and benchmarks build on milestones. That's the easiest way to think of it. So although they're laid out milestones down to activities, if you look at them backwards, you'll see how they build on each other to achieve the ultimate goal or the milestone. And think about these milestones and benchmarks as activities as a guide to give you a general understanding of how these typical type of elections work. But they're not rules. These will always happen in a campaign, because obviously each campaign has a life and spirit and politics of their own, and you can never really, follow a rule book expecting that everything will happen in this perfect chronology, because it never does. So just be aware of that. That it's a guide to give you a greater understanding of the different kind of campaigns that are out there, but these aren't hard and fast, this is the way it happens. But it adds a few things that maybe I didn't touch on earlier, such as the idea of when you have volunteers and you send them out to meet members, or even staff for that matter, make sure that there's a debriefing after they come back or the next day so that they can tell you how things went. Who was a real star that you met that maybe we should get more involved? Who gave us information that we should know about, whether it's positive or negative, etc., that kind of debriefing, as an example. And as you read through the different benchmarks and activities, you'll pick up on those pretty quickly. And there are various types of campaigns that were offered for you to look at, but the skills, the general skills that you have to work on these campaigns, whether it's a volunteer or whether it's a lead organizer, are pretty much transferable. I started my organizing, as I would define it now, looking back, 35 years, when I volunteered on my first political campaign. I was 12 years old. It was a town campaign for town council outside of where I grew up. And my parents were involved to some degree in local politics, and I wanted to get involved. So I walked door to door and dropped literature at people's houses and helped put up yard signs. Real small, basic idea, but by the time I was 18, 6 years later, I was running a congressional district campaign in 1980 for Ted Kennedy when he was running against Jimmy Carter for president in the New York primary. That most of the main political people were on the incumbent side, which is not so unusual. They were on Carter's side. And I was not a Carter supporter. I was a Kennedy supporter. And I found myself in the ability to run a local congressional district-wide campaign for the Kennedy campaign. And we won. And interestingly enough, it was on my birthday. I had 17, so I couldn't vote in the primary I worked on. I was 18, but I couldn't vote yet. So that was kind of cool. Those kind of skills are transferable to a large degree, and it's one of the things that got me interested in organizing because I had worked on so many campaigns, political campaigns. So as you look through the different campaigns, you'll see that many of the skills that you need to have, especially those people skills, are very transferable. So the other thing is there is no such thing as a cookie-cutter approach to these campaigns. You can't say, well, this is how the IBEW runs campaigns, or this is how SEIU runs campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. It never should be like that, because the other side keeps records on unions that are organized. especially those that are looking for work with employers as consultants against the union. They have files. They find ways to keep your literature. They have an idea of what your websites look like. If you are an organizing campaign, they have information on you. Unionfacts.com will list the salaries of the top officers in the union that get reported through the LMRDA, one of the federal laws that requires finance reporting from unions. So they will have information on you, and if you are a corporation that approaches every campaign exactly the same way, it'll make it a lot easier for your opponents to predict what your next move is, and they will be ready for you. They'll be up in front of you, and you'll be playing defense to the campaign. So, again, just keep that in mind when you're thinking about campaigns, especially if you're in a position of responsibility where you start campaigns or play a key role in campaigns of your union. In workplaces that are difficult to organize through sort of traditional, what I call an NLRB campaign, that is, where you get cards and authorization cards and you file petitions and there's a hearing process and then there's an election and then there's an outcome, you may have to use other methods other than that traditional NLRB campaign to win. And the last 2 weeks of the course, we'll be talking about just that, the non-traditional approaches to organizing workers. And some of them are through community groups. They're doing it, in some cases, without unions. And how unions and different unions are taking approaches organizing. And there's some really, really innovative approaches that are happening. The steelworkers are doing some neat stuff in Pittsburgh, and there's a union that was started out of New York City that basically is made up of people that are independent practitioners for the most part. So I'll give samples, and you'll be able to look at their website the next week or two as we hit those things. But think outside of the box. Creativity is the greatest tool that you can have in organizing. It's not money. It's not, a million volunteers. It's not, all those things are very helpful, but the group matter between your ears is your best tool that you have. And, just keep it in mind when you're thinking about approaches to campaign. When I first started with the union, it was one of my first weeks. The director of training for the union I worked for said there are 360 degrees of answers to the problem you have. You just have to look all around you to look for the answer that best fits what you're trying to do. So never think that there's only one or two choices. Keep yourself open. Keep that creativity going, because there are 360 degrees of answers out there all around. Now, you may not realize it at the moment you're looking for it, but sometimes you have to give things time the best you can to gel. So one thing that's interesting is if you take a look at the electoral campaign, the political campaign sample milestones and benchmarks, and then compare that to, let's say, an NLRB campaign, they look pretty simple. Essentially, you get petitions signed by members of the political party, not a lot different than if you're doing a campaign or if you're doing an authorization card campaign. You register people to vote. That is, you determine who's eligible to vote or not. You do the same thing, who's in the bargaining unit, who's out of the bargaining unit, determining the uniting in the district. For endorsements from people, do the same thing. You try to find partners, people that will speak well of the union and work for the union. You create, mailers, and you knock on doors, and there's mapping, charting that happens, candidate research, not opposition research, outreach to political and community leaders. Many times you do the same thing with that. Looking for volunteers to visit people who will be voting. You do the very similar thing in regular campaign for organizing. Get out the vote, GOTV. You do the exact same thing to make sure that the people you believe will vote for you turn out the polls. You do the same thing in political campaign. Phone calls, all those kind of things that happen. Even rides to the polls, conceivably, or victory parties afterward, or, child care, if it comes to that. We'll watch your child while you go and vote. All those kind of things that are very similar to the two kinds of campaigns are interesting to look at, and they just widen your perspective a bit if you have members or potential members that are very active politically. It wouldn't be for, anti-union political groups, hopefully moderate to progressive political groups, that will come your way and support you. And don't prejudge their politics all the time. You may have folks that are very strong with supporting the Second Amendment, let's say, your Second Amendment, the right to own and bear arms. So the idea with that is, and the AFL-CIO has done a really good job with this, is they have formed, in many unions, I'm aware, like UAW has them, they have union clubs. They don't prejudge that because you're strong on Second Amendment issues, that you're automatically completely on the conservative side of every issue. It's just on that particular issue you may be very strong for a variety of reasons. But I think keeping an open mind as to where people are on some of those issues are really important, because you can alienate people that may be great on union issues, the traditional bread and butter issues that we work on. It's just, when it comes to Second Amendment issues, they think that you should maintain your rights to own and bear arms without any kind of legislative infringement. And, that, like I said in the past webinar or two, the idea is don't get into an argument with people that may end up being your supporters, and focus on the issues that are going to win them over. So that's an idea too. Even in areas where collective bargaining is illegal, and that's primarily the public sector, Texas is a famous one. Collective bargaining in the public sector is illegal in Texas. Or right-to-work states, and we talked about right-to-work in the first class. One of the handouts, the addendas to the notes, talked about right-to-work states. That is where you can't have agency fee, and you have members and you have non-members, and the non-members don't have to pay dues. So you have to work pretty hard for that. But there are unions in Arkansas, public sector unions, that do really well. The AFT, one of our national affiliates, has a very strong contingent in Texas. The Texas Federation of Teachers, and they can't bargain collectively, so they have figured out ways, primarily through political pressure, to try to influence the outcome of their terms and conditions of employment. So varying the tactics that you use, thinking creatively, and keeping members involved is critical to those kind of successes that you want to have, whether it's at the bargaining table, whether it's keeping your membership numbers up, or whether it's adding new members or going through the political action process for electing public officials. Really important things to keep in mind. Okay, group work. So we had not a lot of feedback so far, so I'm still looking for feedback for this week's group work on the First Aid Labs and the Ivy Workers Local 500 scenario. So the main thing to get out of that is employer and opposition research is critical. Essentially, the scenario that I put together was that the union was moving along with its campaign, was getting some card signs, had an organizing committee, and all of a sudden, the most notorious, and I don't mean that in a flattering way, anti-union law firm, Jackson Lewis, gets hired by First Aid Labs to stop your efforts. It's a big deal. They put lots of money into anti-union campaigns. And again, they're law firms, so they make their money by billing hours. So the more they can cause trouble and have 50 people at the workplace advising the company on what they should or shouldn't do, they'll do it because they can bill all those hours. So keeping employer research on who these 5 owners are of this lab what their background is, really drilling down deep into who they are, what their connections are, to try to find something that you can use that is positive or can influence the outcome is important. And your opposition in this case is Jackson Lewis. They're going to be running their campaign. They're going to be telling their supervisors everything that they're going to be saying from the point they walked in the door until the end of the campaign, one way or another. So what do you know about Jackson Lewis? Well, there's lots of information about that. I was involved in a campaign where they paid an anti-union firm, but we couldn't find much on this firm, and it was really baffling that we tapped our national resources to try to find out who they were, our statewide resources to try to find out who they were. We had a real hard time finding out this firm. We found out some limited information, but it wasn't as helpful as we had hoped. So if you get somebody like Jackson Lewis opposing you, in one hand, it's bad because they're unfortunately good at what they do. They're sleazy, but their win rates are high enough where they keep getting hired. The good thing about it, in a sense, is you'll find lots of information from other unions and on their own website, and their past people who have used them, companies who have used them, post information on Google pretty frequently, and you can find information from that thing. Your national organization, your statewide organization will have information if you're on them, if you are, or anyone similar to them, if you are an organizing union, a union that puts effort into organizing. Track your authorization cards, another lesson from this little scenario. Track your authorization cards and where they're coming from. Location, titles, shifts, genders, race or ethnic groups, the best you can find that out. Again, your organizing committee. One of the things that I have my committee members do is I have, so unions vary in what these authorization cards look like. Some have them as just, I authorize Union X to bargain on my behalf, and some are dual cards, which are, I want to be a member of this union, and I authorize them. It's a dual purpose card. I make my cards, and I have the freedom to do this with my union. I made all of my cards dual purpose cards. So they were membership cards saying, yes, I want to be a member, and also they were authorization cards in the NLRB sense where they said, I want this union to bargain on my behalf for terms and conditions and for grievances. So one of the things that I had each organizer who brought me the cards the next day, or whenever they brought me signed authorization cards, was I would have that organizer on the back of the card, never mark the front of the card, ever. Never add information that the signer, the member, didn't write themselves because the other side will challenge as a forged card. Because on the back of the card, I just had them put their initials on one of the corners of the card. I think it might have been like upper left-hand corner or something. That way, when we had questions about who was this person, or I can't read their handwriting, or something like that, we know where they got it from, and we can go back to them and have them sign the card. So that's an important thing when you're not sure of like racial or ethnic groups. The person who actually worked with the person to get them to sign the card, they can help you with that kind of information. And that's important based on the information I gave you in the scenario, because you're kind of hit a roadblock and you're having some problems going forward as the scenario describes it. So think about it from that perspective when commenting. Also, counter opposition message while keeping on message. So you've got a scenario where the employer and their consultant, in this case, Jackson Lewis, has done some research. And the research that they were able to dig up, they found that there had been an election, that there had been an opposition that came out with a lot of information that they can use against the union. They got some kind of quotations from workers talking against the union. I mean, they've done research and they found information that can be used against you. So you want to straighten the message or spin the message in a way that doesn't alarm members that there's a problem by them getting involved with the union, and at the same time keeping on your message. So an example, one of the things that we learned about is, and one of the pieces that I had you read, I think it was last week, is that there are lots of reasons people come up with why not to join a union, that you shouldn't join a union. And one of the things is because they're not democratic, because they're run by, big labor, union bosses, all those boogeymen that the other side put out. Well, one of the things you can do is you say, well, we had an election 4 years ago, and it was a healthy, democratic, small d, democratic election in which someone ran, and the incumbent happened to win because the majority of people in the unit had a choice. They got to vote. It wasn't big labor. It wasn't, some union straw boss or strongman or that kind of thing. That there was a process for an election that was open to any member. Any member could vote, and they did. Naturally, the person running against the incumbent would come up with reasons of why they were running, or they wouldn't have run. The idea is you're saying that there's an open democratic workforce and an open democratic process for leadership at all levels within the union. And just because someone found fault with decisions that were made by the leadership doesn't mean that they were necessarily wrong or evil. It just means that there was a disagreement of approach. That's fine. That's no different than Democrats and Republicans. Or bring it down to a local level in your community of where you work. In the last mayoral election or town council election that went on, if you're aware of it, you just say, in other words, to put this election process that non-union workers are not familiar with in terms that they will understand using the scenario. Democrats and Republicans don't understand, they don't agree, and that's a healthy process so that there can be an exchange of ideas of how the union should go forward. And you've turned something that the management folks want to use against you, and you've converted it into something that is an actual selling point for the union. And, that can be a very healthy thing, as a way of countering that message. So keeping on message, the importance of that is don't play defense 24 hours a day, because they will continue to change the channel, as it were. They will change the subject to something else you have to defend and something else you have to defend. And they do that for two reasons. One is to cast doubt in the minds of the members you're trying to reach, because they're trying to reach those same members. Just as you have a list that you're going through to figure out, okay, these are the members who have already signed authorization cards and are supporting us. These are the members that have said no way in hell are they ever going to support the union or participate in it anyway. And then you have, the normal good chunk of people that either haven't made up their mind or are soft supporters or not really sure one way or the other. Well, the other side is doing the exact same thing. They have the same list that you're working off of. They have their folks on the shop floor, supervisors and workers that are anti-union, telling them, who is supporting the union, who they think is supporting the union, who is circulating authorization cards, who is not, who is definitely voting against the union. They're doing the same kind of scorekeeping that you are. So they are going to target their message at the great unwashed. That is, people that have neither said they're totally against the union or have already signed. And we're going to do the same thing. Because what we want to do is to focus the message not just at our supporters, certainly not at the people that we know are never going to support us, but we're going to aim it at those people who have not made up their mind or not made up their mind fully, one way or the other, and that's where the message is going to go. They're going to do the same thing, except theirs is all going to be about putting doubt in their mind about the union. That's their whole game, is doubt. Whether it's the boogeyman of corruption, of socialism, communism, whether it's corruption in the past, or these fallacies of non-democratic, that President Trump is running everything from on high, kind of thing. If they even knew how much infighting we have, not just at the national level, but within our locals or within our state organizations, again, that can be viewed as something healthy. It doesn't always work for us, but it's a way that we can exchange ideas and have disagreements in a way that is, again, small d democratic. So again, changing that message to a way that's positive while not just playing defense 24 hours a day. If you're playing defense 24 hours a day, hang it up. You're done. You lost. Because they will continue to define you instead of you being able to define the other side. Very simple anecdote. If you remember back in the 1992 campaign when Bill Clinton was running for his first term against George Bush the elder, they painted him by, you didn't hear Clinton say it, but you heard, they got it into the media's mouth that it was the economy stupid. That was there was a documentary that came out about George Stephanopoulos and the Raging Cajun. I can't think of his name right now. He's a Democratic strategist who is married to a very conservative Republican strategist. I just can't think of his name right now. But they ran Clinton's campaign in '92, and that was their whole message, is to keep focus on the economy. And Bush never got it. He was off message. He didn't really have a message, other than I'm the president and I won the Iraq I war. That's kind of it. So again, hammering away that message of it's the economy stupid, it's the economy stupid, was effective, and it kept the other side on the defense. Keep workers focused on your message. That's the flip side of what I just said. Whatever your message is, you can briefly address the other side's new tactic, whatever it is, and then quickly turn it to the other side. Well, one of the things that I did was I used electronic media, websites in particular, because they weren't necessarily public. The public didn't know they were out there because you had to know the URL, the address, to get to it, but the workers knew because we gave it to them. It was on all of our order for them to look at. So what I would do is I would post the counter to whatever management said. One of the things was we were organizing a Catholic school, the faculty at a Catholic school, and back in the 70s, I don't know if it was it AF? We weren't with NEA yet. We hadn't jointly affiliated with them yet. So it must have been AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, essentially said in the 1970s on abortion that it's up to the individual. Yeah, I mean, it's not a workplace issue. You don't typically have abortions in your workplace. So it wasn't a workplace issue. So they didn't endorse it or not endorse it. They just said it's not an issue for us because it's not something that is in what we do as a union. It's not part of our mission, our prime mission. Well, the other side turned that around into saying they're not against it. And that had some sway with some people that were teaching the Catholic school for religious reasons, and we had to deal with it. So we dealt with it by posting the complete resolution from that 1970, whatever it was, convention that essentially was an innocuous, generalized statement, and we posted it. We told them the truth. But we didn't focus on it and aim all of our guns at defending that issue. When somebody would say something about it, when we talked with them, and we did in the next days following that, management coming out with that, we did that. We just said, take a look at the website. You can read the document for yourself. And they appreciated that we were very open and forthright. And then we went on to the rest of the message. And it was something like, why do you think management wants you to look at that instead of talking about, then we went back to all of our issues, which were the issues that would interest that particular member. So we addressed it quickly, and then we moved on. But again, use the organizing committee members on your shop floor, your workplace floor, to monitor the mood of the workers, especially as you get close to, if you're going through an election, or if you are collecting authorization cards, or if you're lucky enough to get a neutrality agreement. That is where the employer has agreed to let a third party, neutral, count the authorization cards, and when it's hit, whatever your threshold is, whether it's 50% or 75% or whatever you come to agree on with the employer, once they hit that number and signed authorization cards, then they will verify to the employer that you have enough support as the union, and then the employer agrees to recognize your union voluntarily. That's the voluntary recognition process. It's not part of the NLRB. It's something you work out yourself with the employer if you can. I've been lucky enough to work on a couple of those in the past. Not a lot, but a couple of them. So what's really important is to monitor what's happening on the shop floor. And what I'll post on Monday will underline that, the importance of doing that on the headquarters, the campaign headquarters section of this campaign that we've been working on. It'll show the importance of monitoring the mood on the shop floor. So again, check the campaign headquarters each Monday. There will be some new postings. If you haven't looked in on this week's, take a look at it. See what you would do if this was your live campaign and how you would handle the scenario that I posted. And please do the same for next week also. Any questions about, James Carville. Thanks, Mike. James Carville was the Raging Cajun who co-directed Bill Clinton's first campaign back in '92. Nice catch. Extra points for you. Any questions this week about any of the readings or any of the materials or where we are with the course yet? And while you're typing, if you're typing, I'll also just let you know that I sent out the midterm grades so you have an idea of what your grade is. Sort of the background that I've been waiting to post about what I was looking for, I'm still waiting for someone for a midterm, and that's why I haven't posted anything yet, because I don't want to unfairly, tip their hand to getting a better grade when you didn't have the same benefits, so I certainly won't do that. But as soon as I get that midterm, or I find out one way or the other what student is doing, then I'll post that. So I'll let you know that when I can. So any questions? I don't see anything posted yet. Just a quick reminder, a couple things that I have posted on the good and welfare at the end is that next Thursday, a week from today, will be the last webinar, because the Thursday after that is Thanksgiving, and I'll be eating turkey and watching football, and I imagine they'll be doing something similar. So I will not be having a webinar on Thanksgiving Day or that week. And then the following week, that Monday is the last class. So next week will be the last webinar. Hopefully those will be recorded and posted next week's for also. So you can take a look at that. The Monday before Thanksgiving, I think it's the, here, I cannot do 22nd, I want to say, 25th. On the 25th of November, the final exam will be available. So we're moving pretty close to the end pretty quickly. So the final exam will be available on the 25th of November. Very similar to what you've seen in the midterm as far as math, as far as the instructions will be essentially the same. You'll have a week to do it. The main thing I want to ask you is that if you need more time, let me know, because that's one of the things that's been difficult, is that I know that there are students that have needed more time, and they haven't asked. And I kind of had to chase people a little bit afterward, and it's just what we are empowered to do as instructors is just to say, if it's not on time, it doesn't count. I don't want to do that. So if you can help me out when you need help or you need some more time, just let me know in advance. I've never said to a student that they couldn't have more time, so that's really important. Take responsibility for what your needs are heading into the final exam.
1, 2, 3, 4 things that have been submitted.
Any kind of good and welfare. There weren't any questions tonight. Any kind of good and welfare, anything that you've achieved or want others to know about briefly that you can call a success. So, got a couple. Okay. Mike has, under good and welfare, the machinist voted down the Boeing contract today. Yeah, this is actually really interesting. Washington State Legislature voted to give Boeing a $6.5 billion tax break to keep them in the state, and the union voted against the contract. As you may remember, this was the machinists that were voting. So there are other unions involved with this. One of them in particular is STIA, which represents the engineers that are there. There was a famous strike, I want to say it's a while ago now, more than 10 years ago, there was a strike of SPIA, the engineers, that was highly successful, really successful in Boeing caved, essentially giving SPIA what it was looking for. The difficulty is Boeing, little by little, is starting to move its work to non-union states. I think they're in one of the Carolinas with some of their work now. And the thing that the report I heard on NPR about this that there's concern about is even with this tax break, will Boeing leave Seattle area? And will they say enough's enough, we're going to chase our profits and a right to work state? It'll be interesting to see what happens, but please follow that one as it develops because that's an important one to keep an eye on. Mike further says people should understand that the union may see the writing on the wall and wants to keep the benefits and pay grades. Right. And the idea is this. I have relatives in Pittsburgh, and many of them were connected with when there was aluminum, when there was an Alcoa at one time. The union saw the writing on the wall that Alcoa wanted to get out of the Pittsburgh area, and they wanted to leave. And they wanted to really change what they were doing. This was back in the 80s when steel was in trouble and, a lot of our heavy industries that hadn't been invested in, had been disinvested in, were starting to crumble under the weight of foreign competition, which had put money into some of their industries and made it cheaper, cheap steel, cheap aluminum, et cetera. And what the union decided to do was to get the best package they could and go down and fight because they knew they were going to leave. So they did that. And Alcoa shut down. And I've been past that plant over the years, what's left of it many, many times. The difficulty with it is the town that they were in is a ghost town. I mean, it's a really sad place, New Kensington, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. My brother was actually born there. But a really sad area because there's nothing downtown. I mean, nothing. And it's mostly rental, low-income rentals, crime issues, the usual thing that follows a community that falls apart. And the difficulty with it is you ask anybody who was around during that time sort of what happened, they blame the workers. They blame the union. And if I've got my uncle was a lifer at IBM, so he was non-union. Good guy, he was involved in elective politics in his town, Democrat, all that kind of stuff, sort of should see the good side. But because it was so devastating to the area, that plant closing and that workplace leaving, management was successful in painting the union as the reason that they were leaving. And to this day, if you ask anybody who was around in the 80s or worked at Alcoa, they'll say it was because of the union. So again, really important, when you do things, you got to communicate. We've got a local here, a private sector local, that has been dealing with a very large multi-state grocery store based out of Rochester here in New York. And they, in my estimation, have done a really bad job letting the public know what's happening in bargaining. And this is an area that Wegmans, the grocery store, has been all over the air, not only with their own representatives telling people what's been happening from their perspective, but also has been running a lot of family-friendly ads on the news that show the owner and his two daughters, which are also involved in the corporate structure, family-owned company, talking about your kids and your family and nutrition. All these really soft ads that, just the union has not done a good job. And that's the importance of, having that public persona, talking about what's going on. And that's why I think the next 2 weeks are going to be really good reading and good research on your part with some of the sites I'll have you look at, with some of the non-traditional ways that unions and progressive groups are using to organize workers and advocate for workers, because they far more involve the community and what's going on rather than us and them. Because, remember what I said back at the beginning of the course, is that if you look at the average younger worker today, they will be the first generation in the last 100 years. They will not have anyone that they know or are related to that was a member of the union. So just to say, or to assume that people know why we're doing this is wrong. So it's really important to come out with those broad themes that average working people can identify with.